Hello and welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. In the previous chapter of this book by Napoleon Hill, we are told why this book sat on a bookshelf for 70 years. And after the author died, after the author's wife died, then they removed some of the dust and put it out here into the world. And Napoleon Hill titled this book Outwitting the Devil. And they were really hesitant to publish it for feeling that it was going to be rejected. And yet, it's interesting how many golden nuggets we already can find in Chapter 1. So if you're new to the channel, welcome, glad you found me. Please do make sure to visit my book playlist and grab that first chapter. And to our subscribers here in our community, thank you so much for your support, for your comments, for your recommendations as I keep researching. And if it's something that I may read in the public domain, I will, or I can read it and give us some feedback and we can have a conversation. Without any further delay, let's start on Chapter 2 of Outwitting the Devil, The Secret to Freedom and Success, annotated by Sharon Lechter. Written by Napoleon Hill. Chapter 2. A New World is Revealed to Me. Obviously, I had undergone a new birth by which I had been separated from all forms of fear. I now had courage such as I never before had experienced. Despite the fact that I had not as yet been shown how or from what source, I would be able to secure the necessary funds which I was seeking. I had such absolute faith that the money would be forthcoming that I could see it already in my possession. On but few occasions in my entire life have I experienced such faith. It was a feeling which one person cannot describe to another. There are no words in the English language suitable for such a description, a fact that all who have had similar experiences can easily verify. I proceeded immediately to carry out the instructions I had received. All feeling that I had embarked upon an impossible mission had now left me. One by one, I began to call into my mind the names of all my acquaintances I knew to be financially able to supply me with the $25,000 which I needed, starting with the name of Henry Ford, and going over the entire list of more than 300 people. My other self plainly said, "Keep on searching." The darkest hour is just before dawn. But I had come to the end of my rope. My entire list of acquaintances had been exhausted, and with it my physical endurance as well. I had been at work, concentrating my mind upon that list of names for the better part of 2 days and nights, having stopped only long enough to sleep for a few hours. I leaned back in my chair, shut my eyes, and went into a sort of doze for a few minutes. I was aroused by what seemed to be an explosion in the room. As I regained consciousness, the name of Albert I. Pelton came into my mind, and with it a plan which I knew instantly to be the plan through which I would succeed in getting Mr. Pelton to publish my books. I remembered Mr. Pelton only as an advertiser in the Golden Rule magazine, which I had formerly published. Note: Hill's subconscious mind identified an acquaintance remembered only as an advisor in Hill's magazine. As a potential source of funding, you make an impression on everyone you meet, just as everyone you meet makes an impression on you. You never know when an acquaintance may become a business associate. There is great power in your network. End note. I sent for a typewriter, addressed a letter to Mr. Pelton at Meriden, Connecticut, and described the plan just as it had been handed over to me. He answered by telegram, saying that he would be in Philadelphia to see me the following day. When he came, I showed him the original manuscripts of my philosophy and briefly explained what I believed its mission to be. He turned through the pages of the manuscripts for a few minutes, then stopped suddenly and fixed his eyes on the wall for a few seconds and said, I will publish your books for you. The contract was drawn, a substantial advance payment on royalties was given me, the manuscripts were turned over to him, and he took them back to Meriden. I did not ask him on the time what caused him to reach a decision to publish my books before he had read the manuscripts, but I do know that he supplied the necessary capital, printed the books, and assisted me in selling many thousands of sets of them to his own clientele of book buyers, who were located in practically every English-speaking country in the world. My other self makes good. 3 months from the day that Mr. Pelton called on me in Philadelphia, a completed set of my books was placed on the table in front of me, and my income from the sale of the books began to run high enough for all my needs. These books are now in the hands of my students all over the world. My first royalty check from the sale of my books was for $850. As I opened the envelope in which it came, my other self said, "Your only limitation is the one which you set up in your own mind." Note: your only limitation is the one which you set up in your own mind. Does this statement ring as true for you as it does for me? So many times I have been my worst enemy and needlessly held myself back through a lack of self-confidence. Hill wants us all to discover our other self, so we can each reach our maximum potential. End note. I am not sure that I understand just what this other self is, but I do know that there can be no permanent defeat for the man or the woman who discovers it and relies upon it. The day after Mr. Pelton came to see me in Philadelphia, my other self presented me with an idea which solved my immediate financial problem. The idea flashed into my mind that automobile merchandising methods had to undergo a drastic change, and that future salesmen in this field would have to learn to sell automobiles instead of merely serving as buyers of used car trade-ins, as most of them were doing at the time. It also occurred to me that young men who had just finished college and who therefore knew nothing of the old tricks of automobile merchandising would be the material out of which this new brand of salesman could best be developed. The idea was so distinct and impressive that I immediately called the sales manager of the General Motors Company on long-distance telephone and briefly explained my plan to him. He too was impressed by it and referred me to the West Philadelphia branch of the Buick Automobile Company, which was then owned and managed by Earl Powell. I went to see Mr. Powell, explained my plan to him, and he retained me at once to train 15 carefully selected young college men through whom the plan was put into operation. My income from that retainer was more than enough to take care of all my expenses for the following 3 months, until the returns from the sale of my books began to come in, including the cost of that expensive suite of rooms, over which I had at first been so concerned. My other self had not disappointed me. The money I needed was in my hands at the proper time, just as I had been assured the money would be. By this time, I had been convinced that my trip to Philadelphia was by no means a fool's mission. As my reason had indicated, it would be before I left West Virginia. From that time right up to this very minute, everything I have needed has come to me, and this despite the fact that the whole world has recently passed through a period of economic depression, when the bare necessities of life have not always been available to all people. Sometimes the arrival of material things I needed has been a little late, but I can truthfully say that my other self has always met me at the crossroads when I have come to them, and indicated which path I should follow. The other self follows no precedents, recognizes no limitations, and always finds a way to accomplish desired ends. It may meet with temporary defeat, but not with permanent failure. I am as sure of the soundness of this statement as I am of the fact of being engaged in writing these lines. Note: the other self may meet with temporary defeat, but not with permanent failures. How many times do we allow a temporary defeat to affect us as if it were a permanent failure instead of learning from it and moving on? As Hill describes, he himself faced many setbacks along his journey, but each time he was able to find the seed of greater benefit and move on to greater successes. End note. Meanwhile, I earnestly hope that some of the millions of men and women who have been wounded by the business depression and other unpleasantness experiences will discover within themselves this strange entity which I have called my other self, and that the discovery will lead them, as it has led me, into a closer relationship with that source of power which surmounts obstacles and masters difficulties, instead of being mastered by them. There is a great power to be discovered in your other self. Search sincerely, and you will find it. Note: Hill's work was published during the Great Depression and indeed helped millions of people find hope and courage to live in faith that they would find their own paths to success. I believe we can find many parallels between his time and our time. It is during periods of great stress that we find our will and our inner strength. With the current economic uncertainties, people are choosing or being forced to find new paths to provide for themselves and their families, and many will find great success. They will be the great stories of success we will be reading about a few years from now. Will you be among those success stories or still watching from the sidelines? End note. Failure, a blessing in disguise. I have made another discovery as the result of this introduction to my other self, namely, that there is a solution for every legitimate problem, no matter how difficult the problem may seem. Note: there is a solution for every legitimate problem, no matter how difficult the problem may seem. While this concept may be difficult to acknowledge when you are in the midst of the storm, hindsight generally proves it true. End note. I have also discovered that there comes with every experience of temporary defeat and every failure and every form of adversity the seed of an equivalent benefit. Mind you, I did not say the full-blown flower of success, but the seed from which that flower may be made to germinate and grow. I know of no exception to this rule. The seed of which I speak may not always be observed, but you may be sure it is there, in one form or another. I do not pretend to understand all about this strange force which reduced me to poverty and want, and filled me with fear, and then gave me a new birth of faith through which I have been privileged to extend help to tens of thousands who found themselves slipping. But I do know that such a force has come into my life, and that I am doing all I can to place others in communication with it. During my quarter century of research into the causes of success and failure, I have discovered many principles of truth which have been helpful to me and to others. But nothing I have observed has impressed me more than the discovery that every great leader of the past, whose record I have examined, was beset by difficulties and met with temporary defeat before arriving. Note: every great leader of the past whose record I have examined was beset by difficulties and met with temporary defeat before arriving. Failure and temporary defeat are part of the journey to finding true success. End note. From Christ on down to Edison, the men who have achieved most have been those who met with the most stubborn forms of temporary defeat. This would seem to justify the conclusion that infinite intelligence has a plan, or a law, by which it hurdles men over many obstacles before giving them the privilege of leadership or the opportunity to render useful service in a noteworthy fashion. I would not wish to be again subjected to the experiences through which I passed during the fearful Christmas Eve in 1923, and since, on that eventful evening when I walked around the schoolhouse in West Virginia and fought that terrible battle with fear. But all the wealth in the world would not induce me to divest myself of the knowledge I have gained from those experiences. Faith has a new meaning to me. I repeat that I do not know exactly what is this other self, but I know enough about it to lean upon it on a spirit of absolute faith in times of difficulty, when the ordinary reasoning faculty of my mind seems to be inadequate for my needs. The economic depression, which started in 1929, brought misery to millions of people. But let us not forget that the experience also brought many blessings, not the least of these being the knowledge that there is something infinitely worse than being forced to work. It is being forced not to work. In the main, that depression was more of a blessing than it was a curse, if analyzed in the light of the changes it brought to the minds of those who were wounded by it. The same is true of every experience which changes men's habits and forces them to turn to the great within for the solution of their problems. Note: there is something infinitely worse than being forced to work. It is being forced not to work. In the main, that depression was more of a blessing than it was a curse, if analyzed in the light of the changes it brought. Is Hill being harsh here, or is he looking beyond the immediate cause and effect of economic disaster to the underlying spiritual result that comes from the true crisis? Can our present economic travails be more of a blessing than a curse? Can economic hardship, such as the loss of a job, be a blessing in disguise? Perhaps yes, if the result is the awakening of an entrepreneurial spirit and the creation of a new business. End note. The time which I spent in seclusion in West Virginia was, by great odds, the most severe punishment of my life. But the experience brought blessings in the form of needed knowledge which more than offset the suffering which it cost me. These two results, the suffering and the knowledge gained from it, were inevitable. The law of compensation, which Emerson so clearly defined, made this result both natural and necessary. Quote, Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1803 through 1882, explained the law of compensation in very clear terms. Quote, for everything you have missed, you have gained something else, and for everything you gain, you lose something else. In his journal dated January 8, 1826, he also wrote, the whole of what we know is a system of compensations. Every defect in one manner is made up in another. Every suffering is rewarded. Every sacrifice is made up. Every debt is paid. End quote. End note. What the future may hold for me in the way of disappointment through temporary defeat, I of course have no way of knowing. I do know, however, that no experience of the future can possibly wound me as deeply as have some of those of the past, because I am now on speaking terms, at least with my other self. Since this other self took charge of me, I have come by useful knowledge which I am sure I never would have discovered while my old fear entity was on the throne. For one thing I have learned, that those who met with difficulties which seem insurmountable may, if they will do so, best overcome these difficulties by forgetting them for a time and helping others who have greater problems. The value of giving before trying to get. I am sure that no effort which we extend to those who are in distress can go without some form of adequate reward. Not always does the reward come from those to whom the service is rendered, but it will come from one source or another. I seriously doubt that any man can avail himself of the benefits of his other self as long as he is steeped in greed and avarice, envy and fear. But if I am wrong in this conclusion, then I still have the unusual honor of being one who has found peace of mind and happiness through a viewpoint that was not sound. I would prefer being thus wrong and happy to being right and unhappy. But this viewpoint is not wrong. As long as I remain on good terms with my other self, I shall be able to acquire every material thing that I need. Moreover, I shall be able to find happiness and peace of mind. What more could anyone else accomplish? The sole motive which inspired me to write this book was a sincere desire to be helpful to others by sharing with them as much as they may be prepared to accept of the stupendous fortune which became mine the moment I discovered my other self. This fortune, happily, is one that cannot be measured in material or financial terms alone, because it is greater than everything which such things represent. Material and financial fortunes, when reduced to their most liquid terms, are measurable in terms of bank balances. Bank balances are no stronger than banks. This other fortune of which I speak is measurable, not only in terms of peace of mind and contentment, but as manifested in those adept at prayer. My other self has taught me to concentrate upon my purpose and to forget about the plan by which it is to be attained when I got to prayer. I am not suggesting that material objects may be acquired without plans. What I am saying is that the power which translates one's thoughts or desires into realities has its source in an infinite intelligence which knows more about plans than the one doing the praying. Stating the case in another way, may it not be wise, when praying, to trust to the universal mind to hand over the plan best suited for the attainment of the object of that prayer? My experience with prayer has taught me that so often all which results from prayer is a plan, if the prayer is answered at all. A plan that is suited for the attainment of the object of the prayer through natural and material media. The plan must be transmuted through self-effort action. I know nothing about any form of prayer which can be induced to work favorably in a mind that is colored in the slightest degree by fear. Note: is prayer a part of your life? Do you trust God to hand over the plan best suited for the attainment of the object of your prayer? Do you acknowledge that in order for your plan to be successful, you must take action? End note. A new way to pray. Since becoming better acquainted with my other self, my way of praying is different from what it was before. I used to go to prayer only when facing difficulty. Now I go to prayer before difficulty overtakes me, when possible. I now pray, not for more of this world's goods and greater blessings, but to be worthy of that which I already have. I find that this plan is better than the old one. Infinite intelligence seems not at all offended when I give thanks and show that I am grateful for the blessings which have crowned my efforts. I was astounded when I first tried this plan of offering a prayer of thanks for what I already possessed, to discover what a vast fortune I had owned without being appreciative of it. For example, I discovered that I possessed a sound body which had never been seriously damaged by illness. I had a mind which was reasonably well balanced. I had a creative imagination through which I could render useful service to great numbers of people. I was blessed with all the freedom I desired, in both body and mind. I possessed an imperishable desire to help others who were less fortunate. I discovered that happiness, the highest aim of mankind, was mine for the taking, business depression or no business depression. Last, but by no means least, I discovered that I had the privilege of approaching infinite intelligence, either for the purpose of offering thanks for what I already possessed, or to ask for more and for guidance. It may be helpful for every reader of this book to take inventory of his or her intangible assets. Such an inventory may disclose possession of priceless value. Note: may we all make an inventory of our blessings in life and give thanks for every gift that we have been given. I know that when I am at a low point in my life, I force myself to think of my family and friends and the blessings they have brought to my life. It is the quickest path up and puts my temporary setbacks into perspective. End note. Some signs we have overlooked. The whole world is undergoing a change of such stupendous proportions that millions of people have become panic-stricken with worry, doubt, indecision, and fear. It seems to me that now is a splendid time for those who have come to the crossroads of doubt to endeavor to become acquainted with their other selves. All who wish to do so will find it helpful if they take a lesson from nature. Observation will show that the eternal stars shine nightly in their accustomed places, that the sun continues to send down its rays of warmth, causing Mother Earth to yield an overabundance of food and clothing, that water continues to flow downhill, that the birds of the air and the wild animals of the forest receive their accustomed requirements of food, that useful day follows restful night, that busy summer follows the inactive winter, that the seasons come and go precisely as they did before as the 1929 Depression began, that, in reality, only man's mind have ceased to function normally, and this because men have filled their minds with fear. Observation of these simple facts of everyday life may be helpful as a starting point for those who wish to supplant fear by faith. I am not a prophet, but I can, with all due modesty, predict that every individual has the power to change his or her material or financial status by first changing the nature of his or her beliefs. Note: every individual has the power to change his or her material or financial status by first changing the nature of his or her belief. It was right after publication of Think and Grow Rich in 1937 that Napoleon Hill began his manuscript for Outwitting the Devil. Through his interview with the devil, Hill discovers and reveals how the devil may be having his way with you and how you can ignite your other self to not only conquer the devil in your own life, but to also empower your other self to achieve your greatest success. Throughout his work is the recurring theme of the importance of transforming your thoughts from fear to faith. End note. Do not confuse the word belief with the word wish. The two are not the same. Everyone is capable of wishing for financial, material, or spiritual advantages, but the element of faith is the only sure power by which a wish may be translated into a belief, and a belief into a reality. And right here is an appropriate place at which to call attention to a real benefit which anyone may experience by deliberately using faith in focusing attention upon any form of constructive desire. The mind acts upon one's dominating or most pronounced desires. There is no escape from this fact. It is a fact indeed. Be careful what you set your heart upon, for it surely shall be yours. Faith is the beginning of all great achievement. If Edison had stopped by merely wishing for the secret with which electric energy might be harnessed and made to serve through the incandescent lamp, that convenience to civilization would have remained among nature's multifarious secrets. He met with temporary defeat more than 10,000 times before wresting this secret from nature. It was finally yielded up to him because he believed it would be, and he kept on trying until he had the answer. Edison uncovered more of nature's secrets. They might have been called miracles at an earlier period in the realm of physics than did any other man who ever lived, and this because he became acquainted with his other self. I have his own word for this, but even if I did not have it, his achievements of themselves have disclosed the secret in their unfoldment. Nothing within reason is impossible to the man who knows and relies upon his other self. Whatever man believes to be true has a way of becoming true. A prayer is a released thought, sometimes expressed in audible words and at other times expressed silently. I have observed by experience that a silent prayer is as efficacious as the one which is expressed in words. I have observed also that one's state of mind is the determining factor when prayer works, as well as when it does not. My conception of the other self, which I have tried to describe, is that it merely symbolizes a newly discovered approach to infinite intelligence, an approach which one may control and direct through the simple process of mixing faith with one's thoughts. This is only another way of saying that I now have greater faith in the power of prayer. The state of mind known as faith apparently opens to one the medium of a sixth sense through which one may communicate with sources of power and information far surpassing any available through the five physical senses. There comes to your aid and to do your bidding with the development of the sixth sense a strange power which, let us assume, is a guardian angel who can open to you at all times the door to the temple of wisdom. The sixth sense comes as near to being a miracle as anything I have ever experienced, and it appears so perhaps because I do not understand the method by which this principle is operated. This much I do know, that there is a power or a first cause or an intelligence which permeates every atom of matter and embraces every unit of energy perceptible to man. That this infinite intelligence converts acorns into oak trees, causes water to flow downhill in response to the law of gravity, follows night with day and winter with summer, each maintaining its proper place and relationship to the other. This intelligence may aid in transmuting one's desire into concrete or material form. I have this knowledge because I have experimented with it and have experienced it. I have for many years followed the habit of taking personal inventory of myself once a year, for the purpose of determining how many of my weaknesses I have bridged or eliminated, and to ascertain what progress, if any, I had made during the year. Note: this section on faith is worth rereading a few times because it contains Hill's core teachings on prayer. Faith, in his view, is a sixth sense or spiritual power that enables one to succeed if one is in step with the first cause of all things, one of his descriptions of God. His is a practical or scientific faith that emphasizes tangible results. In the book 3 Feet from Gold, my co-author and I discuss the personal success equation that clearly reveals the importance of faith. P plus T times A plus F, your personal success equation. Combining your passion with your talent, and then seeking the right association and taking the right action are very important components for success. But it is when you combine all those components with a strong faith in yourself and your mission that you truly have your personal success equation. End of note. End of chapter. Stay with me as we move on to the next chapter right here in this video, to chapter 3, titled A Strange Interview with the Devil. Before I flip the page, please do hit that like button. All right, sit back as we continue with Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, with annotations by Sharon Lechter. A Strange Interview with the Devil. While you are reading The Interview with the Devil, you will recognize from the brief description I have given you of the history of my life what a desperate effort the devil made to muzzle me before I gained public recognition. You will understand also, after reading The Interview with the Devil, why the interview had to be preceded by this personal history of my background. Before you begin to read The Interview, I want you to have a clear picture of the final fling the devil had at me, and be it remembered with profit that it was this final fling which gave Mercy a chance to turn and twist the devil's tail until it squealed out his confession. The devil's undoing began with the Depression in 1929. Through that fortunate turn of the wheel of life, I lost my 600-acre estate in the Catskill Mountains. My income was entirely cut off. The Harriman National Bank, in which all my funds were deposited, folded up and was wiped out. Before I realized what was happening, I found myself caught up in a spiritual and economic hurricane which evolved into a worldwide catastrophe of such a force that no individual or group of individuals could withstand it. While waiting for the storm to cease and the stampede of human fear to stop, I moved to Washington, D.C., the city from which I made my start after my first meeting with Andrew Carnegie, nearly a quarter of a century previously. There seemed nothing for me to do except sit down and wait. All I had was time. After 3 years of waiting without tangible results, my restless soul began to push me back into service. There was little opportunity for me to teach a philosophy of success when the world around me was in the midst of an abject failure and men's minds were filled with the fear of poverty. This thought came to me on one evening while I was sitting in my automobile in front of the Lincoln Memorial on the Potomac River, within the shadow of the Capitol. With it came another thought. The world had staged an unprecedented depression over which no human being had control. With that depression had come to me an opportunity to test the philosophy of self-determination, to the organization of which I had devoted the better portion of my adult life. Once more, I had the opportunity to learn whether my philosophy was practical or mere theory. I realized, too, the opportunity had come to test a claim I had made hundreds of times, that every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. What, if any, I asked myself, were the advantages to me of a world depression? When I began to look for a direction in which I might move to test my philosophy, I made the most shocking discovery of my life. I discovered that through some strange power which I did not understand, I had lost my courage. My initiative had been demoralized. My enthusiasm had been weakened. Worst of all, I was sorely ashamed to acknowledge that I was the author of a philosophy of self-determination, because down deep in my heart I knew, or thought I knew, that I could not make my philosophy pull me out of the hole of despair in which I found myself. While I floundered in a state of mental bewilderment, the devil must have been dancing a jig or rejoicing. At last he had, the author of the world's first philosophy of individual achievement, pinned under his thumb and paralyzed with indecisions. But the devil's opposition must have been at work too. As I sat there in front of the Lincoln Memorial, reviewing in retrospect the circumstances which had so many times previously lifted me to great heights of achievement, only to let me drop to equal depths of despair, a happy thought was handed over to me in the form of a definite plan of action by which I believed I could throw off that hypnotic feeling of indifference with which I had been bound. In the interview with the devil, the exact nature of the power by which I had been deprived of my initiative and courage has been described. It is the same power with which millions of others were bound during the Great Depression. It is the chief weapon with which the devil ensnares and controls human beings. The sum and substance of this thought which came to me was this. Despite the fact that I had learned from Andrew Carnegie and more than 500 others of equal business and professional achievements that noteworthy achievements in all walks of life come through the application of the mastermind, the harmonious coordination of two or more minds working to a definite end, I had failed to make such an alliance for the purpose of carrying out my plan to take the philosophy of individual achievement to the world. Despite the fact that I had understood the power of the mastermind, I had neglected to appropriate and use this power. I had been laboring as a lone wolf instead of allying myself with other and superior minds. Note: the interview with the devil may have occurred as Hill sat at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial. Was it real? It was real to Hill, and created the framework for how he lived his life and shared his revelations with us, his students. To reiterate Hill's earlier words, he had discovered that every great leader of the past, whose record I have examined, was beset by difficulties and met with temporary defeat before arriving. Hill also describes, in his words, how these great leaders surrounded themselves with master minds. They conquered their inner struggles with adversity and then used the power of the mastermind to propel their successes. Consider how you could form a mastermind group, a team, to help you overcome adversity and propel you to success. End note. An analysis. Let us now briefly analyze the strange interview you are about to begin. Some who read will want to ask, after they finish it, did you really interview the devil, or did you merely interview an imaginary devil? Some may wish the answer to this question before they begin the interview. I will answer in the only truthful way I could answer, by saying that the devil I interviewed may have been real, just as he claimed to be, or he may have been the creation of my own imagination. Whichever he was, whether real or imaginary, is of little importance compared with the nature of the information conveyed through the interview. The important question is this: does the interview convey dependable information which may be helpful to people who are trying to find their places in the world? If it conveys that sort of information, no matter whether it is conveyed in the form of fact or fiction, then it is worthy of serious analysis through careful reading. I am not concerned in the least as to the real source of the information or as to the real nature of the devil whose astounding story you are about to read. I am concerned only with the fact that the devil's confession squares perfectly with what I have seen of life. I believe the interview does convey information of practical benefit to all who have not found life to be friendly. And the reason I believe so is the fact that I have made the central theme of this book yield to me all the happiness I need, in the form best suited to my nature. I have had experience with enough of the principles mentioned by the devil to assure me that they will do exactly what he says they will. That is enough for me. So I pass the story of the interview on to you for whatever you may be able to make it pay in useful dividends. Perhaps you will get the greatest values if you accept the devil as being what he claims himself to be, relying upon his message for whatever it may bring you that you can use, and not worrying as to who the devil is or whether he exists. If you want my honest personal opinion, I believe the devil is exactly who he claims to be. Now let us analyze his strange confession. After forcing his way into the consciousness of the devil, Mr. Earthbound began the unwilling interview with questions which could not be evaded. Note: Hill, Mr. Earthbound, interrogates the devil in an almost courtroom atmosphere. Somehow the devil is obligated to give complete and accurate answers. How was this done? Perhaps Hill forced the devil's confession by forming a mastermind, possibly with his wife, the harmonious coordination of two or more minds working to a definite end, to exert the power of God, the great storehouse of infinite intelligence wherein is stored all that is, all that ever was, and all that can ever be. Perhaps Hill won the right to accurate responses by being a thinker in control of his own mind, who mastered all his fears. Thanks to this mastery and control, Hill could demand true and accurate responses from the devil. In any event, Hill forces the devil to expose his tricks and wiles so that we may counter them and avoid the pitfalls in our lives. End of note. Here begins the interview with the devil. Question: I have uncovered the secret code by which I can pick up your thoughts. I have come to ask you some very plain questions. I demand that you give me direct and truthful answers. Are you ready for the interview, Mr. Devil? Answer: Yes, I am ready. But you must address me with more respect. During this interview, you will address me as Your Majesty. Question: By what right do you demand such royal respect? Answer: You should know I control 98% of the people of your world. Do you not think that entitles me to rate as royalty? Note: I had an extremely adverse reaction to hearing the devil referred to as Your Majesty when I first read this interview. Then I realized that Hill probably intended to create just that reaction, and I read on. And of course, the text does not reflect whether Hill might have used an ironic or sarcastic tone when so addressing the devil. End of note. Question: Have you proof of your claim? Answer: Yes, plenty of it. Question: Of what does your proof consist? Answer: Of many things, If you want answers, you will address me as Your Majesty. Some things you will understand, some you will not. In order that you may get my viewpoint, I shall describe myself and correct the false notions people have of me and my place of abode. Question. That is a fine idea, Your Majesty. Start by telling me where you live, then describe your physical appearance. Answer. My physical appearance? Why, my dear Mr. Earthbound, I have no physical body. I would be handicapped by such an encumbrance as those in which you, earthbound creatures, live. I consist of negative energy, and I live in the minds of people who fear me. I also occupy 1/2 of every atom of physical matter and every unit of mental and physical energy. Perhaps you will better understand my nature if I tell you I am the negative portion of the atom. Question. Oh, I see what you're preparing to claim. You are laying the foundation to say that if it were not for you, there would be no world. No stars, no electrons, no atoms, no human beings, nothing. Is that correct? Answer. True. Absolutely true. Question. Well, if you only occupy 1/2 of energy and matter, who occupies the other half? Answer. The other half is occupied by my opposition. Question. Opposition? What do you mean? Answer. The opposition is what you, earthbound, call God. Question. So you have the universe divided up with God. Is that your claim? Answer. Not my claim, but the actual fact. Before this interview is finished, you will understand why my claim is true. You will also understand why it has to be true, or there could be no world such as yours, no earthbound creature such as you. I am no beast with a forked tongue and a spiked tail. Question. But you do control the minds of 98 out of every 100 people. You said so yourself. Who causes all the misery in this 98% devil-controlled world, if you do not? Answer. I have not said that I do not cause all the misery of the world. On the other hand, I boast of it. It is my business to represent the negative side of everything, including the thoughts of you, earthbound people. How else could I control people? My opposition controls positive thought. I control negative thought. Question. How do you gain control of the minds of people? Answer. Oh, that is easy. I merely move in and occupy the unused space of the human brain. I sow the seeds of negative thought in the minds of people so I can occupy and control the space. Question. You must have many tricks and devices by which you gain and hold control of the human mind. Answer. To be sure, I employ tricks and devices to control human thought. My devices are clever ones too. Question. Go ahead and describe your clever tricks, Your Majesty. Answer. One of my cleverest devices for mind control is fear. I plant the seed of fear in the minds of people, and as these seeds germinate and grow, through use, I control the space they occupy. The 6 most effective fears are the fear of poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. Note. Says the devil, one of my cleverest devices for mind control is fear. The fear of poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. End note. Question. Which of these 6 fears serves you most often, Your Majesty? Answer. The first and the last, poverty and death. At one time or another during life, I tighten my grip on all people through one or both of these. I plant these fears in the minds of people so deftly that they believe them to be their own creation. I accomplish this, and by making people believe I am standing just beyond the entrance part of the next life, waiting to claim them after death for eternal punishment. Of course, I cannot punish anyone, except in that person's own mind, through some form of fear. But fear of the thing which does not exist is just as useful to me as fear of that which does exist. All forms of fear extend the space I occupy in the human mind. Question. Your Majesty, will you explain how you gained this control over human beings? Answer. The story is too long to be told in a few words. It began over 1,000,000 years ago when the first man began to think. Up to that time, I had control over all mankind, but enemies of mine discovered the power of positive thought, placed it in the minds of men, and then began a battle on my part to remain in control. So far, I have done quite well by myself, having lost only 2% of the people to the opposition. Question. I take it from your answer that men who think are your enemies. Is that right? Answer. It is not right, but it is correct. Question. Tell me something more about the world in which you live. Answer. I live wherever I choose. Time and space do not exist for me. I am a force best described to you as energy. My favorite physical dwelling place, as I have told you, is the minds of the earthbound. I control a part of the brain space of every human being. The amount of space I occupy in each individual's mind depends upon how little and what sort of thinking that person does. As I have told you, I cannot entirely control any person who thinks. Question. You speak of opposition. What do you mean by that? Answer. My opponent controls all the positive forces of the world, such as love, faith, hope, and optimism. My opponent also controls the positive factors of all natural law throughout the universe, the forces which keep the earth and the planets and all the stars balanced in their courses. But these forces are meek in comparison with those which operate in the human mind under my control. You see, I do not seek to control stars and planets. I prefer the control of human minds. Question. Where did you acquire your power, and by what means do you add to it? Answer. I add to my power by appropriating the mind power of the earthbound as they come through the gate at the time of death. 98 out of every 100 who come back to my plane from the earth plane are taken over by me, and their mind power is added to my being. I get all who come over with any form of fear. You see, I am constantly at work, preparing the minds of people before death, so I can appropriate them when they come back to my plane. Question. Will you tell me how you go about your job of preparing human minds so you can control them? Answer. I have countless ways of gaining control of human minds while they are still on the earth plane. My greatest weapon is poverty. I deliberately discourage people from accumulating material wealth because poverty discourages men from thinking and makes them easy prey for me. My next best friend is ill health. An unhealthy body discourages thinking. Then I have countless thousands of workers on earth who aid me in gaining control of human minds. I have these agents placed in every calling, and they represent every race and creed, every religion. Question. Who are your greater enemies on earth? Your Majesty. Answer. All who inspire people to think and act on their own initiative are my enemies. Such men as Socrates, Confucius, Voltaire, Emerson, Thomas Paine, and Abraham Lincoln. And you are not doing me any good either. Question. Is it true that you use men who have great wealth? Answer. As I have already told you, poverty is always my friend because it discourages independence of thought and encourages fear in the minds of men. Some wealthy men serve my cause while others do me great damage, depending upon how the wealth is used. The great Rockefeller fortune, for example, is one of my worst enemies. Question. That is interesting, Your Majesty. Will you tell me why you fear the Rockefeller fortune more than others? Answer. The Rockefeller money is being used to isolate and conquer diseases of the physical body in all parts of the world. Disease has always been one of my most effective weapons. The fear of ill health is second only to the fear of poverty. The Rockefeller money is uncovering new secrets of nature in 100 different directions, all of which are designed to help men take and keep possession of their own minds. It is encouraging new and better methods of feeding, clothing, and housing people. It is wiping out the slums in the large cities and places where my favorite allies are found. It is financing campaigns for better government and helping to wipe out dishonesty in politics. It is helping to set higher standards in business practice and encouraging businessmen to conduct business by the golden rule. And that is not doing my cause any good. Question. What about those boys and girls who are said to be on the road to hell? Are you in control of them? Answer. Well, I can answer that question only with yes and no. I have corrupted the minds of the young by teaching them to drink and smoke, but they have me baffled through their tendency to think for themselves. Note: Hill ranges back and forth across the devil's field of battle. His earlier point about Rockefeller's philanthropy is followed by an explanation of why young people are on the road to hell. I believe the author is challenging us to hold several ideas in mind at once as he lets the devil do his dirty work with the hope of confusing us. Look for other examples throughout the book. You'll find them. End of note. Question. You say you have corrupted the minds of the young people with liquor and cigarettes. I can understand how liquor might destroy the power of independent thought, but do not see what cigarettes have to do with helping your cause. Answer. You may not know it, but cigarettes break down the power of persistence. They destroy the power of endurance. They destroy the ability to concentrate. They deaden and undermine the imaginative faculty and help in other ways to keep people from using their minds most effectively. Do you know I have millions of people, young and old, of both sexes, who smoke 2 packages of cigarettes a day? That means I have millions of people who are gradually destroying their power of resistance. One day I shall add to their habit of cigarette smoking other thought-destroying habits until I shall have gained control of their minds. Habits come in pairs, triplets, and quadruplets. Any habit which weakens one's willpower invites a flock of its relatives to move in and take possession of the mind. The cigarette habit not only lowers the power of resistance and discourages persistence, but it invites looseness in other human relationships. Question. I never thought that cigarettes were a tool of destruction, Your Majesty. But your explanation throws a different light on the subject. How many converts to the habit do you now claim? Answer. I am proud of my record. Millions are now victims, and the number is increasing daily. Soon I shall have most of the world indulging in the habit. In thousands of families I now have followers of the habit, including every member of the family. Very young boys and girls are beginning to take up the habit. They are learning how to smoke by observing their parents and older brothers and sisters. Question. What do you consider to be your greater tool for gaining control of human minds? Cigarettes or liquor? Answer. Without hesitation, I would say cigarettes. Once I get a young person to join my 2-package-a-day club, I have no trouble in inducing that person to take on the habit of liquor, overindulgence of sex, and all other related habits which destroy independence of thought and action. Note: remember, this was written in 1938, long before the addictive nature of tobacco was discovered. Here, as elsewhere, Napoleon Hill is far ahead of his time in some of his medical and sociological opinions. End note. Question. Your Majesty, when I began this interview, I had you all wrong. I thought you were a fraud and a fake, but I see now that you are quite real and very powerful. Answer. Your apology is accepted, but you need not have bothered. Millions of people have questioned my power, and I got most of them at the gate as they came over. I ask no person to believe in me. I prefer that people fear me. I am no beggar. I take what I want by cleverness and force. Begging people to believe is the business of my opposition, not mine. Question. Your Majesty, will you please pardon my rudeness, but I would not be able to look myself in the face again if I did not tell you, here and now, that you are the damnedest fiend ever to be turned loose on innocent people. I always had the wrong conception of you. I thought you were kind enough to let people alone while they were living, that you merely tortured their souls after death. Now I learn, from your own brazen confession, that you destroy their right to freedom of thought and cause them to go through a living hell on earth. What do you have to say to that? Answer. I get what I want by exercising self-control. It is not so good for my own business, but I suggest you emulate me instead of criticizing me. You call yourself a thinker, and you are. Otherwise, you would never have forced this interview on me. But you will never be the sort of thinker that frightens me unless you gain and exercise greater control over your own emotions. Question. Let us get away from personalities. I came here to learn more about you, not to discuss myself. Please go ahead and tell me of the many tricks you have devised for gaining control of the human mind. What is your most powerful weapon just now? Answer. That is a difficult question to answer. I have so many devices for entering human minds and controlling them that it is difficult to say which are the most powerful. Right at the moment, I'm trying to bring about another world war. My friends here in Washington are helping me to involve America in the war. If I can start the world to killing on a wholesale basis, I shall be able to put into operation my favorite device for mind control. It is what you may call mass fear. I used this device to bring about the other World War in 1914. I used it to bring about the economic depression of 1929. And if my opposition had not double-crossed me, I would now be in possession of every man, woman, and child in the world. You can see for yourself how near I came to world domination, the thing I have been struggling to obtain for thousands of years. Note. Here the devil claims to be working with both sides to instigate war, based on his sowing the seeds of fear throughout the world. This is the essence of what has come to be known in our time as terrorism and the response to it. Through Hill's work, the devil takes credit for not only both world wars, but also the Great Depression. It is easy to add the current economic collapse to his list of credits. Both war and economic collapse breed fear in people's minds and are certainly the work of the devil. End note. Question. Yes, I see your point. Who wouldn't? You are a very ingenious manipulator of the minds of people. Is your devilish business carried on only through people of high position and great influence? Answer. Oh no, I use the mind of people in all walks of life. As a matter of fact, I prefer the type of person who makes no pretense of thinking. I can manipulate the sort of person without difficulty. I could not control 98% of the people of the world if all people were skilled in thinking for themselves. Question. I am interested in the welfare of those people whom you claim to control. Therefore, I wish you to tell me all of the tricks by which you enter and control their minds. I want a complete confession from you. So begin with your cleverest trick. Answer. This is suicide you are forcing on me, but I am helpless. So settle down, and I will place in your hands the weapon by which millions of your fellow earthbound will defend themselves against me. End of chapter. All right. If you haven't done so, do hit that like button. Leave me a comment. What do you think so far? And if this is of value to any of your friends, please do share it with them. Let's head over now to the next video where we're going to continue with Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil, annotated by Sharon Lechter, in Chapter 4, Drifting with the Devil.